In this video, we're going to discuss a little bit more about event handlers as well as the stop function, and we're just going to give a high overview of how everything fits together. So let's actually go ahead and look at that overview of how everything fits together. These are the different sections of our code. We have the run and the stop function. Now, inside of my run function, this is where it's going to start, and we've already talked about how we create command definitions here. We create a toolbar control, so this creates our button, and then we link that to an event handler. So if they ever press a button, it goes into an event handler. That event handler is called the command created event handler. If they press the button, that command created event handler is what's linked to pressing that button. Now once that event handler is triggered, we go into that event handler, and we've already discussed how we have command input, so a user can select things or input a value. Now notice that within this event handler we can also define additional event handlers, and there's two that I want to mention right now. And one of those is going to be an input changed event handler, and the other is going to be an OK event handler, so that within your dialog box, if they ever hit the OK button, that triggers an event, and it can go in and grab all of the information from the dialog box and perhaps call other functions to do something. So let's actually just go ahead and look at the code and look at the examples of that and how that works. So first of all, this is my belt button pressed event handler. Notice it's a command created event handler, so that if somebody presses my button, the event handler gets triggered and they come into this code. I have some of my command inputs, so they can select things and select some values. Now notice I have an on input changed. This is a special event handler, so that if any of these values are ever changed, if they change the selection they want, or they change the slider bar, it triggers an event. Now this event is a different event. It's called a .input changed event handler. I'm going to be going through this quick. If you need to pause and just look at the code, feel free to do so, but this input changed event handler, if any of this input is ever changed, it comes into here. And the reason why I want that is I want to show in the text box, in my dialog box, the distance between the two pulleys. So since I want this distance to constantly be updating, if they ever change a value in this slider bar, it will trigger an event, and it will come in here and update my value for that. So let's look at that in Fusion 360. So notice on my belt length calculator, as soon as I press this, an event is triggered, a command created event. And then within this, I have all of my my command inputs. Now I can select a couple things. Now notice as soon as I did that, my belt length populated. Now also notice as soon as I change my slider bar at all, this updates, and that's because an input changed event handler is connected to this, so that if I do anything, this updates. Now notice if I press an OK button, nothing happens. And the reason for that is I don't have an OK button event handler. In contrast to that, my pulley generator event handler does have one of those. So if they press my button to create a pulley, up comes this, and I have all these different selections. Now notice at the end of this, I have an on execute event handler. So it's a pulley dialog OK event handler. That's what I've called it. So as soon as they hit the OK button, it calls another command called .command event handler. So if they press the OK button, it comes in and runs this code. Now this code, what it's going to do is it's going to grab some of the values from the dialog box. So whatever their drop down input was, it's going to grab, so right here, .command inputs, item by ID, drop down 1. It's going to reassign that to a different name, and then it's going to start pulling out values from that. And so then as soon as they hit OK, I'm going to grab a lot of the information they gave me. I'm going to pass that information into some of the code that I created, for example, in Lab 2. So in order to create a pulley, I needed to know how many teeth in the diameter. So the number of teeth is something that I let them choose. So right here in the drop down 2, I grab the value for that, and then I rename it, and I pass that into a generate pulley. So going back to this here, notice we have an event handler triggered as soon as they hit the button, but then if they hit the OK button, it goes into a different event handler, and this event handler passes out all of the information I got from my command inputs into different functions that actually creates things. It either calculates the belt length, or it imports a part, or it creates a pulley. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to Fusion 360 and run the other one. So for example, if I choose a number of teeth here and I select a face, nothing happens, but as soon as I hit OK, now it grabs all of those values I gave it and it creates this, and then it's going to assemble it for me. So that's just how everything works together. Now let's discuss one more thing, and that's going to be the stop function. So up here I have my run function. We also have a stop function as well. And it's important to know that we need to go in, when we hit stop, we need to delete all of the belt button definitions and the toolbar controls that we created when we first started our code. Basically, when somebody stops our add-in, we want to get rid of everything we've done. We don't want to leave a button in their toolbar, and we also want to delete those IDs. This is especially important when we're debugging. For example, if I'm debugging my code and I try and run it once, it's going to create a lot of these IDs and these belt button definitions. Then if I have to stop it and rerun it after I've changed some things, Fusion's not going to let me run it again because it already has a belt button definition with that same ID. So whenever we stop our code, I come in here, I grab this command definition, item by ID, I rename it something, and then if it's valid, so if this returns a 1, if it's valid, I just delete it. I also grab the belt button control and I delete it as well. So that way the button disappears, the button definition is deleted as well, and I do that for both of my buttons. So that's kind of what the stop function does, and that's the overview of how Lab 4 kind of all fits together. So once again, feel free to go back and look at some of the code in more detail, but hopefully that gives you a better picture overall of how everything fits together.